Hello and welcome back. It's me, Miss Birds, and today we are going to be going over Celtic knots. And these come from Irish culture, and so we're going to be studying that a little bit more in this month of March since we have St. Patrick's Day coming up. The Celtic knots are very interesting. They are a symbol of infinity, so something that never really ends, and they're almost kind of an illusion, right? We see that they are all attached and connected together. Again, they never end. They never have a point where it breaks apart. And they're always kind of interlooping or interlocking. And so we are going to be looking at how to draw these today. Now, I have provided you guys with this worksheet available on Google Classroom. So if you have a printer, feel free to go ahead and pre-print those out for today's lesson. If you don't have one or you don't have access to print out this page, that is completely fine. You can follow along with the drawings that we have. We will not have time in this video to go over all four. So what I am asking is that for this assignment, you choose 2 of the Celtic knots that you would like to attempt to draw today. Now I have uploaded the picture of this to Google Classroom as well too. So you may just want to, on your screen, open it up in a different tab so you can kind of follow along. You can choose to either draw the 2 that I am going to be showing you an example of today, or choose any of the other 2 that you see on this page here. So we are going to be drawing them, and then if we have time, I can show you how to do a little bit of shading to make it look a little more three-dimensional. But for right now, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to go over to my blank page here, and I'm going to start out with this first knot. It's a little bit more simplified, so whereas the other knots kind of have 4 different loops or 4 different squares, right? This one only has 3. It's a triad, and that root word tri means 3, right? Triad. And so what I'm going to do, what's really important here when we're drawing the Celtic knots is to really look at the lines and shapes, right? So I've talked to you guys before, if you are looking at something and you're looking at trying to draw something, the best thing to do is to break it up into lines and shapes. So we can either look at this area here as all one large shape, or we can break it down into lines. I see one line kind of coming up and then coming down halfway, and then the inside line coming up, right? It's parallel to this outside line, and then coming down about halfway. It is important to remember to always be working with a pencil, and you may want to have an eraser handy. That way you can go through and erase out any necessary areas. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with these lines going up here. So I can tell that this line kind of starts towards the bottom. So I'm going to start there and loop it up to the top, creating that point, right? Because even though it's really curved, it's kind of coming to a point here. So looping it across, and then I'm going to look at this line. So how far down is that line coming? And it comes about at the halfway point in between this line, right? So it's ending, sorry, I had some of it off the screen there. So this line goes all the way up, and then the line on the side kind of goes about to that halfway point. So again, breaking it down into lines and shapes is going to just make it a lot easier. There we go. And then I'm going to do this inside line. So notice I'm not focusing on the whole knot. I'm just looking at this area here. We don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, and especially with these Celtic knots, they're an illusion, right? Kind of tricks your eye a little bit. So we want to make sure that we're going slowly and really identifying where we need to put in our lines and shapes. Okay, so now I'm going to work from, actually I'm going to work from this side, that way I'm not rubbing my hand up against the graphite. So if I'm looking at this shape here, it comes about halfway into this loop, right? Halfway into this loop, kind of curves down, and then curves all the way back to that halfway point pretty much. So I'm going to go ahead and start creating my first line, which is that outer line going down, meeting at that point, and then curving upward. And if we look at where this line ends, if we were to connect that line, it connects up to this top portion here. So I want to make sure that when I'm drawing my line, I'm not connecting it there, right? Because we have this space here that's on top of it. But I want to make sure that if I were to take my pencil and move it right up to that line, that it would be in line with that area I've already created at the top. So now I'm going to go through and do that bottom section. Coming to that point. I'm also kind of keeping in mind that when we go through and we see the shape of the knot, they're pretty much all the same width, right? So the width here is about the same here and here and here. So I don't want to have an area where it's too wide. They should all be pretty much the same size. Now I can see that this line at the bottom is connecting to these two lines here. So I want to make sure that with my line, I'm reaching through, connecting those lines together, and coming up with my line. Now for the last part, I'm going to work on this right-hand side. Again, where it's connecting is to these lines here, right? So even though this shape is coming in front of this area here, the lines should still be able to be connected at some point, right? If I draw my pencil there, those lines would be connected. So I want to make sure I take from that around that same area, loop it upward so it's matching the lines here. They're not completely intersecting, but they are matching up at the same point, right? So we want to make sure that we keep that handy, keep that information handy, and then bringing that line down. Right? It starts here, comes round, curves downward. And it actually connects to this line here. So if I were to take my pencil, connect those lines together, they would connect. Now I don't want my lines to go through this area here because that would not make the illusion look the way it is, right? We have to make sure that we are taking those lines, still making sure that they connect back to that point, has kind of a triangular look to it. And then I'm going to finish off the rest of the knot, connecting from this area here to this area. And if you start to see an area where the lines are not completely connecting. So right here, I can see that my lines didn't really connect with this line coming horizontally. So what I can do is just move those lines up a bit. And there we go. That is our first Celtic knot. Now, if we want to, we can go in and add a little bit of shading to make it look very three-dimensional. So if I look back to my example here, we can add in darker values, right, by pushing down on our pencil, creating those dark values, and then taking pressure off of our pencil to get those light areas. So if you were to go through and shade this Celtic knot, this is the thing that you have to remember. Anytime you're shading something that is a rounded object, the most rounded part is going to stay the white of the paper. And the areas here that are kind of connecting to the rounded part are going to be the parts that we shade. So I'm going to start pushing down on my pencil, creating that really dark value, and taking pressure off of my pencil just slowly so that I get those nice mid values. And then just kind of lightly gliding my pencil across the paper to get those very light values. Now this is the area where it's curved, so I don't want to touch that part. I'm going to leave it the white of the paper. But what I am going to do is start from the point here where it's pointed on my knot and bring those lines in. So again, we want to start with a very dark value by pushing down really hard on our pencil, taking some pressure off of our pencil to get those mid-tone values like the ones I'm creating now, and then lightly gliding our pencil to create those lightest values. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So again, taking from the point, creating that dark value, creating my midtones and creating my light areas. My curve is kind of right here, so I can add in a little bit of value at this part. And I can do the same for the other areas, leaving that curved part, but putting in the value here. Creating those darker values again where my point is. Going into my mid values and my lightest values. And doing the same on the opposite side. Now, you do not have to go through and shade your Celtic knot if you don't want to. That's completely fine. But it does look pretty cool. Gives it a very three-dimensional effect. But for the sake of our tutorial today, we're not really focusing too much on the shading portion. I want you just to get to the idea of understanding how the knot really works. How do we create this knot? How do we create this illusion to make it look like all of those ends are connecting and there are no end points? So I'm going to go ahead and move on to my second one. Now I'm going to choose to do the knot that's right next to it. Again, you can choose any two knots on this paper that you would like to do. So if you would feel, or if you feel like maybe you really like the design of this knot, how it comes into that square shape, you can do that. Or these very oval-y shapes, that is also fine. I'm gonna go ahead and stick with these smaller loops. And I'm gonna go through and do the same technique as I did before. Break it down into lines and shapes. So I'm gonna start from the top, and I can see about my midway point begins here. Create my line. It ends about midway through this line. So I'm going to end it about right there and then start creating that second line. Now I can go through and either leave some area here, connect it at the bottom, and start doing this loop, or I can finish out this one. So I think I'm actually going to finish out this loop and then take it to the left, down, and to the right. So I'm going to look at where my lines would be connecting. I'm going to leave a little bit of space about the width of this line here and bring it down. Again, I'm going to leave a little bit of space for where this line will cut across. And then start creating my loop. Now this loop here is going to connect to the top, so this is why I have this area here. Again, making sure that I pay attention to the width of my knots. Right? These should be the same width as this. Bringing that line in. So really we just want to make sure that we're paying attention to the lines. Where are the lines connecting? Where are they ending? I know this line is coming up and across and actually connects with where the top of these lines were. So I want to make sure I connect, go under and across to connect to these lines. Now this one's a little bit more complicated, right? As soon as we start adding more loops, it's going to make the whole thing a little bit more complicated. But just make sure that you're going through and taking it one line at a time. One line or one shape at a time. Remember, these are kind of an illusion, so it is going to trick your mind a little bit. It is going to trick your mind a little bit, but just do the best that you can to complete the knots. This is kind of like a brain game, right? We're testing your brain to go through and create these knots. And you can adjust where you need to. We can do shading on this knot as well, similar to how we did shading here, keeping that curved area white of the paper and then adding in some darker values. Hopefully you guys think, I mean, some of you guys will probably think this is really fun, trying to understand that illusion, trying to understand how it works and connect it. Some of you may be getting a little frustrated. Don't get frustrated. Just take your time. Again, remember to go by the lines and the shapes and do the best you have. Just give it your best effort. Once you get the hang of it, it'll be pretty fun. And you may even want to try and do those other two at the bottom, or try the other two that you did not complete. So this is the end of our tutorial today for drawing the Celtic knots. Remember, they are infinity knots, so there is no end. They are intertwined, interlocked, and they move together. So you may choose to draw any of the 2 of 4 Celtic knots that you see on this page. It does not matter which ones, and if you would like to try giving it a shot, adding in some shading to make your knot a little bit more 3-dimensional. Once you're done, make sure that you take a picture of the 2 that you did create and upload them to the Google Classroom assignment.